everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today we're going to be talking about Mission Impossible 2 and its 4K Blu-ray. But first, before we dive into all that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, lists, and podcasts, we try and do them all here on the channel, and nothing would help this channel out more than by you just simply liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So Mission Impossible 2 was released in 2000. It is the sequel to 1996's Mission Impossible, and this time it is directed by John Woo, and Robert Towne again did the screenplay for this one. And this time we're bringing back Tom Cruise as IMF agent Ethan Hunt. The only other real returning actor from the first one is Ving Rhames, back in his regular role. And we get plenty of new players in this one, including Thandie Newton as a professional thief and is the former lover of Doug Ray Scott, who plays Sean Ambrose. He is an ex-IMF agent. He betrayed the IMF because in this movie, he's decided to go into business for himself, and he ends up stealing this biological weapon that the scientist was forced to make, and he plans to sell that biological weapon to Brendan Gleeson's character, who happens to have the antidote. So if he's in possession of both the disease and the antidote, he is going to make billions on this. So that is the big plan of this movie. The big MacGuffin of this movie is to make sure that that biological weapon does not end up in the wrong hands, and that's where Ethan Hunt and his team come into play. But Ethan Hunt in this movie, he needs the help of Thandie Newton's character of Nyla, because she is the one that is going to help infiltrate the character of Sean Ambrose, because he's going to be a little bit trusting of her, or so we think. And then from that point on, we got ourselves a movie. And this movie is, I think, a pretty big step down from the first Mission Impossible movie, but I've always said that I really don't like Mission Impossible 2, and after rewatching it, I was wrong. This is actually a pretty decent movie. It's just not as good as the other Mission Impossible movies. What this movie lacks is what a lot of the other Mission Impossible movies have. In the first one, it is a pretty straightforward spy espionage film with some good action sequences in there. The third Mission Impossible movie has some great action sequences with a very memorable villain. And then 4, 5, and 6, they become these super action heavy movies, seeing what Tom Cruise can do, and just the stunts just become really the star of those movies. And then, you know, obviously we have some great character actors in all of them, but this movie just has the great action sequences. It feels like a John Woo 90s movie that he was doing in America, like movies like Broken Arrow.
You're out of your mind. Ain't it cool?
Face Off. So if you're into those movies, you probably will like Mission Impossible 2. It's really just a straightforward, turn off your brain action movie, which I actually surprisingly enjoyed this time because it feels like a John Woo movie, you know, right down to the doves in a bunch of scenes, the slow motion shots, you know, some great action sequences, some great hand-to-hand combat scenes, including one of the very last action scenes in this movie where Tom Cruise insisted that they put the knife on a hook so it can get just as close to his eye as possible, and they had to use a real knife because it's Tom Cruise, and if he's not putting his life on the line, he's not doing the stunt. So all that is done perfectly in this movie, all the stunt work, all the action scenes. I actually was pretty surprised at how much I enjoyed this movie, because usually, for the most part, from what I remember, I didn't really like this movie, and I just think it's because I had to go into it with the right mindset, and just I remember that this movie just kind of has some really cheesy dialogue, and I'm talking really cheesy dialogue in this movie, and apparently that's something that also pissed off Tom Cruise, because, you know, he kind of felt like he was trying to make the best of a bad script. But at least the action sequences are good. They're fun to watch. You know, it's funny, though. This movie has a lot of similarities to the James Bond movies at the time. These feel very similar to those, which I also feel like the Pierce Brosnan movies, other than GoldenEye, are kind of a step down from what the James Bond franchise would become with Daniel Craig and where it was coming off of with Timothy Dalton. This movie kind of fits into the James Bond bubble at the time, and it's funny because both GoldenEye and this feature a rogue MI6 agent in GoldenEye, and in this movie it's a rogue IMF agent. So I wonder if that was intentional, where they were trying to kind of copy what GoldenEye was going for, because GoldenEye is considered one of the best Bond movies. So I'm wondering if John Woo and Robert Towne, Tom Cruise kind of wanted to have their own kind of story in that same vein, but I just don't think it works that well from a story standpoint or even from a plot standpoint. I think this movie just works simply as a turn off your brain action movie, and if you can do that, you'll have a good time. Just don't go into it expecting it to be a really deep spy thriller, because I don't think that's what this movie is. It's really just a run-of-the-mill late 90s, early 2000s action movie, one that you've seen before a million times, but those are always still pretty enjoyable. Everybody is doing their job well enough, you know, nothing worth complaining about. It just doesn't feel like the rest of the franchise. It's definitely the weakest in an already incredible franchise, whereas the rest of them kind of range in the 8 to 10 area. This one is kind of operating in like the 6.5 to 7, just passing, just worth a good trip to the movies if you happen to see this in 2000. I mean, it did make a ton of money. It was one of the biggest hits of 2000. I remember the stuff that they were doing at the MTV Movie Awards with this movie at the time. So
When is Tom Cruise?
I think if you're going to be a really good stunt double, you have to really become one with the actor.
It was still very popular. I just think as time has gone on, we kind of reflect on this movie and look back at it as the weakest in the franchise, but it's still a pretty solid film. So if you haven't seen Mission Impossible 2, I definitely can recommend it from a film standpoint. But we're here today to talk about the 4K Blu-ray as well from Paramount. Now, when this was originally printed, it did come with a slipcover. I didn't get the slipcover because I actually happened to buy this only last year because, like I said, I wasn't a big fan of Mission Impossible 2. So when I bought the other ones, I didn't buy this one just because I really didn't want to rewatch it, but I decided to rewatch it for the channel. Man, I'm really glad I did because, like I said, I did enjoy the movie. So when you pop it open, you get a blue Blu-ray disc and a black 4K disc, right in line with what Paramount usually does. That Blu-ray disc is, I believe, their previous Blu-ray from about 2007, I want to say. So it's really old and it's really noticeable in the menus, just like with Mission Impossible, but all of your extras are going to be on that Blu-ray disc, and there's a plenty of them. That's one thing I want to point out. While I'm going through these Mission Impossible movies, I've noticed that the Blu-ray discs have so many extras on them. When we get to Mission Impossible 3, they actually have it on a separate disc, so when we get there, we'll talk about that. But this one, it's got the film and all the extras on that Blu-ray disc, which I absolutely thought was awesome. And comparing that Blu-ray to the 4K, just like Mission Impossible, it's a pretty damn big jump from the Blu-ray to the 4K, where the Blu-ray kind of can look a little bit blurry, a little bit dated because it's a pretty old Blu-ray. And now the 4K itself has the works on it. It's got Dolby Vision, HDR10. It's got a Dolby True HD 5.1. I'm surprised it didn't have a Dolby Atmos track on it, but the track that's on here was pretty good. I was actually surprised. I was listening to it. I'm like, oh, wow, it's making really good use of all my speakers. It's just that, you know, I would have appreciated a Dolby Atmos track, which is weird because some of the other 4Ks did get Dolby Atmos tracks, and it's weird that this one didn't. But it's still a really solid audio track, just like everything in this movie. It's everything as far as the visuals and the audio goes, all just really solid. The visuals, you know, not as good as what we would get as far as Mission Impossible movies go. I would say that the visuals in this are very similar to actually the first Mission Impossible movie, where some scenes might look a little bit grainy. As far as the resolution increase, it's very noticeable. Certain scenes look just absolutely gorgeous on my screen. Like later in the movie, when the room is kind of lit very green on the Blu-ray, that green overwhelms the entire scene. But on the 4K, because of the resolution increase, because of the HDR, it looks noticeably better, and it really does pop off your screen. And that Dolby Vision and HDR, again, just doing great work as far as making the blacks deeper, making the colors more vibrant, more vivid. You know, it becomes a very beautiful looking 4K. As far as the visuals go, it's about a 9.5, and the audio is pretty damn solid itself. And then again, like I said, on the Blu-ray disc, you get plenty of extras. This is what I mean when I say that Paramount, when they want to, they really can just give you one of the best looking 4Ks around. And so far, with Mission Impossible and Mission Impossible 2, they really did spring for almost all the bells and whistles. The only thing that's really missing is a Dolby Atmos track. But as far as overall goes, this is a really solid 4K. It's not the greatest Mission Impossible movie. It's probably the weakest in the franchise, but the 4K disc itself is extremely solid. You're going to get the best visual showpiece for Mission Impossible 2 that I'm sure will ever be released. You get a pretty damn solid audio track, and they have all those extras. And, you know, it's a really nice package. I really wish that Mission Impossible Fallout would have followed this design so that they would have looked just very uniform on my shelf, but it's understandable that they didn't. I still really appreciate that the first 5 have their own individual designs to it. So overall, I'm going to really give this an 8.5 out of 10. I'm really happy with my purchase of Mission Impossible 2. And if you haven't checked out Mission Impossible 2 in a while and you were like me thinking that this really was a bad movie, I would say why don't you reconsider? Check it out, get ready for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, revisit the whole franchise, and maybe you'll get something more out of Mission Impossible 2. I know I did, and I definitely don't regret watching it this time, so definitely check this one out if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here with me on another episode of Let's Talk. I really do appreciate all of your support, and if you want to keep supporting this channel, nothing supports this channel out more than by just simply liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And then after you're done doing all of that, I want you to go out in those streets and tell your friends about us. We'll be seeing you around.